We're almost home. And then you see me stand and cry now. And you asked me why I died and how. And I recall the things you said then. I remember every word you spoke. We're almost home. We're almost home. We're almost home. We're almost home. I remember you well. You were there, and everything I said was wrong. Everything I did, you stayed. Wish I could take it all back now. Wish I could change the things I did. But I know I can't go back now. But I know I can't go back. Please forgive me one more time. We're all...
The view that I hear is that we can disagree with Ellen White, and that is of no consequence.
That's what we're hearing. Well, that's what I'm hearing.
It happens in practice in certain parts of the world.
But that's the one illustration we were bringing up. It seems in practice that that's the only thing that we can see against a guy like Des Ford, Walter Ray.
Desmond Ford's teachings were tested against the Scripture. And the Glacier view group testing them against the Scriptures did not see light in his view. It is out of that context, not against Ellen White.
Hazel, Guy, and Johnson. And we followed the same format, except this time we had, statements that came from the breakout groups. And we tried to put them together and weld them together. And we developed what we called a consensus statement. That came, Glacier View, the conference itself, was scheduled to end at noon on the Friday. Okay. Friday morning, the consensus statement that we developed was brought to the floor. It was read, it was discussed, and it was voted. If not unanimously, very close. And very interestingly, Desmond Ford said, I can agree with everything in this statement.
Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest today is Gillian Ford. How did you like the intro there, Gillian? A special tribute
Very nice.
to you and Des. And I think I had the volume down a bit quiet, so might have to play it again as our outro so people can have it cranking up nice and loud. Hey, it's great to have you here. We're going to be talking today a little bit about this series. Hang on a second. I have my books here. I'm missing one. I've got 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Number 3 is in my suitcase. And when I was recently in Melbourne, I had it in my suitcase, and I was reading it every night while I was down there. They're incredibly accessible and easy to read and informative. And I find myself often watching season 2. And if you mention someone that I interviewed in season 2, I go back and watch a bit of the interview. So not trying to plug myself at all, but the season 2 SDA Q&A in conjunction with these by your bed while you're watching season 2 are a really great kind of collaborative resource. But you have put in thousands and thousands of hours. Just briefly, as I showed that clip at the intro, there's so many little things there. You'd have to watch it twice to read what I wrote. But the key thing for me with that is that when I watched the Ankerberg show, the 1984 one, and Bill Johnson was being interviewed, he seemed to make it clear back then that the majority vote was against Des, and that they didn't see light in his view, is I think what he exactly says. And then when I interviewed him, and you'd always said to me, yeah, I think there's a bit more going on there. That's not how I remembered it. And then to have him actually season 2 interview 1, I think it is, where he says the second thing, where we got together there on the Friday morning, we put the consensus statement to the vote, and the majority agreed with it, even Des himself. So we know, and we've talked about in the past, the little 10-point statement that was wheeled out in the afternoon, and in all good conscience, Des couldn't go along with that, but that wasn't voted on. It was a separate little side show that was used essentially in the end to defrock him and to eventually take away your credentials. And so to me, that one myth that, interestingly, I think, in my humble opinion, was begun by Bill, was also dispelled by Bill in the end. And look, I've said this many times, I don't want to disparage Bill Johnson, who led a lifetime of doing incredible things. And you and I have chatted about this before. And I myself was 54 years kind of under the spell of this kind of just do what the administration say and go along with whatever they say. So I saw his kind of reveal and the turning around, flipping it on its head, that myth, a brave and courageous thing. So I want you, before we dig in to the series, the 7-volume series, just give us a brief, what was Glacier View? Who is Des Ford? Who are you to Des Ford? Just give us a brief, what was going on within the Adventist Church that seemed to create this drama, this kind of split within the church in many ways. And it seemed to be on theological grounds to do with the investigative judgment, the sanctuary doctrine, etc. Give us a bit of background. I'll stop talking. And great to have you on the show. Send your love hearts, everyone. Click like, hit that subscribe button. And it's great to have Gillian Ford with us today. Over to you, Gillian.
Wow. Okay. That's a big ask. But let me say about Bill Johnson that I've got a fair bit about Bill Johnson in this series, mainly things that he wrote, letters, articles in the review, the memorial of Des, and then Trevor Lloyd just before Bill died, which was just over a year ago, actually on the same place as Des.
Just before Bill Johnson died, not Trevor.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Trevor did an interview with Bill Johnson. I asked Spectrum about it. They thought he possibly was a year before. And I'm glad that Trevor did it because Bill really came clean. Now, that interview, with permission from Spectrum, who let me publish about 10 whole articles in one volume, which I thought was pretty amazing and unexpected. No questions asked. So that was very gracious. Anyway,
that's fabulous.
He gradually comes cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And he admits, in fact, I sent it to Milton when that came out, Milton Hook, and we agreed that we were happy that Bill came clean about the issues. Now, just the thing about the 10-point statement, because it was mentioned in that little video at the beginning, one thing that I haven't got in the book, that I came, I think, from Des's daughter, Len, who in the early 2000s, because she was involved with Peacewise, a group that mediates, she wanted to practice on the denomination. I'm sure it was more than that. She wanted to try and get her father back in. Now, this was about 2005. She actually visited Bill, stayed in a hotel nearby and met with him. And in my memory, Bill said that he hadn't realised about the 10-point statement until he was in Australia and he talked to Norm Young. So that's another factor that and you got
how many years later is he saying that was?
It's about 2005.
Oh, you mean
and
right
he doesn't mention that when he does the interview with Trevor, but it's possible because you see, the scholars were taken off guard. You've got to, you may not like all that happened, but they didn't really understand that the 10-point statement was used in the afternoon Friday meeting. Not the consensus statement, which Des was happy with. He was actually thrilled with it.
Yeah.
But that wasn't what was used to judge him. It was the 10-point statement.
Yeah.
And that was 6 people out of the group behind the scenes writing down 10 points where Des disagreed essentially with the Dallas statement. But in Neil Wilson's mind, the Dallas statement was traditional Adventism written in a new way to fit a modern culture. He saw them as the same. So Des was judged on traditional Adventism, not on any changes that took place during the Glacier View week. And when you read the consensus statement, it made some amazing changes. And the thing about a consensus statement, it's no good Bill's sort of hinting that at the beginning that the group was against Des on biblical grounds, but the consensus statement, which Bill wrote with Fritz Guy, largely, the idea of a consensus statement, there was an interview you did with Len, and she's a barrister, retired barrister, and she said a consensus at law shows where the two parties, the church and Des, agreed and found common ground. So you can't say if the consensus went along with Des in 12 points, as he said, and 7 of them were major, we'd never said them before, you can't say that Des just... You can't say there was disagreement because they actually changed. But
that's
that
right.
wasn't what was used to...
That's right.
And that was all planned ahead of time.
That's what I was about to say. What comes across to me, and I don't know if our overseas friends watching use this term, but kangaroo court, where the decision was already made before August 1980, and we've got to draw a line in the sand. We've got to get rid of this guy, and Neil Wilson and others that we've discussed in the past. And so here we have, and for those that are joining and don't know what Glacier View is, sometimes we use terms 10-point statement, consensus statement, and people go, what are they talking about? So Des Ford came up with some views questioning Ellen G. White's foundational kind of theological basis for the investigative judgment, that perhaps it wasn't biblical. And those kind of rumblings had been going on for nearly 2 decades. Come the late 70s, he did a massive program, October 27, 1979, at speaking of forum, at a forum gathering, from a small venue to a bigger venue to 1,000-seater. And that kind of took off around the world, that 1-hour talk, where he shared his views and the reasons that he doubted some of the theology of the Adventist beliefs on the investigative judgment. And that sparked, I think, a lot of, put the cat amongst the pigeons. And so Glacier View, and tell me, you know more about this than me, but Glacier View is this conference gathering that the administration pulled together, saying to Des, come along and share your beliefs and your thoughts. They had over 120 people turn up, scholars, administrators, pastors, teachers, academics, and they sat there and discussed these things for a week. We won't go into the details of that. Come the end of the week, Bill Johnson, Hassel, and Fritz Guy, maybe?
Fritz Guy said that Hassel was never there when he was there. It was him and Bill.
Okay.
But it may be that Bill met with Gerhardt. Gerhardt
Separately.
apparently did the section of the consensus on Ellen White. He was
Right.
involved in that.
And people get confused with that. The consensus statement is divided into 2, but there is one consensus statement. In my interview with Bill Johnson, it was in 2 parts. One statement in 2 parts. On that morning, on the Friday, as Bill said just then, and as he says more in depth in the actual interview I did with him, they present this statement. He says they discussed it, they read it, they voted on it, and he said, if not all, the majority, the vast, he didn't say majority, but if not all, most of them, yeah, we can agree with this. And even Des said, we can agree with this. And there was a great sense of excitement. This is going to turn out good. I can just imagine Neil Wilson and Parmenter and Athol Tolhurst, they're all sitting there go, uh-oh, we didn't think it was going to go this way. What do we do? So Neil Wilson had up his sleeve this other statement. Most people have left. Friday afternoon, you and Des and 6 others are wheeled into this back room somewhere at Glacier View at the conference venue, and out comes these 10 points, which were, I think, when I interviewed Norm Young, who was one of the people that contributed to the 10 points, said, so he said to me that some of these points were quite, I think Neil had said to him, put together some points that are really out there that Des couldn't possibly agree with. What are his extreme views that don't go along with? And so Des was kind of, in many ways, asked, could he go along with them? He said he couldn't, in all conscience, but he was happy with the consensus statement that was voted on, read, and discussed. So I see this as them wheeling this thing out just to make sure that their predetermined goal was met, to kick Des out. So, yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, in the Friday afternoon, the only mention of the consensus statement was when somebody, I think it was Frank, one of the vice presidents said to Des, what did you think of the consensus? And Des said, I think it's great. I can live with it. And of course, they thought, now the men there, I'm sitting there, I don't know most of these people, but their vice presidents, Parmenter, Arthur Duffy, and the Desert and I are here. I was crying my eyes out. But I thought these are good men, but they don't know what's going on, because they thought the consensus statement and the 10-point statement agreed.
That's right. No.
Yeah.
10 Point is an
In fact, they didn't
original.
believe Des.
Yeah.
And in the Ministry magazine in October, when you go through it, there's a whole article showing where this was all in Des's mind, that the consensus statement went along with his position. In fact, he said to them on the Friday afternoon, he said, "You've gone so far that in a couple of years you'll go all the way with me," which of course people would say sound arrogant, but I mean, Des knew his stuff. He really knew it, and it wasn't addressed at Glacier View.
Well, I think that's one of the in the interview I did with Bill Johnson, one of his frustrations was in his mind that Des should have just watered it all down, that things were changing, and if they'd all just kind of. But to me, in my humble ponderings on this, I can see now, 44 years later, that Des knew even then what I know now, that these guys aren't ever going to change. So he did the I was just going to hold. I've got them over there. The 970-page manuscript. He wrote that in such a defined way. He drew a line in the sand, and I got the impression that Bill Johnson didn't like that. And I said to Bill in the interview, because he was saying, "Oh, things would have changed," and I said, "Well, how has that slow, nuanced approach worked out for you?" Because it hasn't actually changed at all. I said, "How did staying actually work?" And he kind of shrugged and said, "Oh, yeah, good point." So it didn't work, and Des was willing to be bold. Now, what are you holding up there?
Now, this is the Glacier View manuscript, which I redid in 2014. Big job, had to put all the Greek and Hebrew in, etc. And I took it from a PDF file that, can't think of his name right now, had done with his son. Otherwise, it would have been a huge job. I was able to take the text out, replace all the foreign language stuff and everything. And I did it in those three forms. So that is available. All of these books that I show you are available on Amazon. I've republished a lot of Des's books.
And I'm just holding up the original three so that people can see this actually would have been one of the ones they used at Glacier View. And you were holding up the three that you've redone, and yours are available for sale. And if someone offers me $1,000, you can have this one too. Now, I just found, I thought it was in my suitcase, but I did bring it in earlier this morning. I found my volume 3. So I'm just going to I'm making a little pile. I feel good about that. I've got all 7, my original manuscripts. They're just going to sit behind us and watch over us.
Right. So, look, why did I write the books? Let me tell you a little bit about these books and why I did it. I had no plans to do it. And then I'd spent years, preparing for this. I did a series of about 20 or 30 interviews, videos of myself. I was doing videos of Des, and I thought, I could do something. So I went through Glacier View, and I wrote transcripts of this, which I gave to Des, and he taught to me a lot, stuff I didn't know. This has been a real learning experience for me. Don't think I knew all this before I started. I didn't. So then what happened? You came up and interviewed Des, and then we went down in 2000, I think it was 15 or 16, 2016. And Des said to me, I'd better go because he'd had a stroke and he thought he was having his teeth out. The first one procedure caused the first stroke. And he thought he was about to have the second one, which was some months later, and he'd had a stroke. Recovered amazingly. And went down and did that series with you.
That was amazing. It's available on YouTube if anyone wants me to send the link, by the way.
So I had all that background. And then, of course, Des died. And I had to deal with his library, which we had willed to Avondale. And I won't go into the details of, I didn't know whether I should send it or not, whether they'd want it. Anyway, in the end, the archivist, Rosalie Power, she made 2 legal contracts, one with the division and one with herself. and she was to take charge of the collection and to decide who would take it over. So I thought, well, if I send it, other places, last year I wanted it, PUC wanted it, Andrews would have wanted it. But I thought, Des is Australian, should go to Avondale. That's where he taught for so long. I'm going to lose my track. So anyway, I spent a year and 10 months scanning the most important documents.
Well, you were just saying that because of you giving this permission to Rose and something happened there that made you think, hang on a second, I don't know if this is going to be nestled and looked after as I'd like it.
Well, that's right.
And that's what led to what you're about to say.
I called a former division president, asked him to talk to Glenn Townend, which he actually didn't. He did something else, which wasn't helpful. But I thought in the end, we did the two things, and it gave me some sort of guarantee that Rosalie would look after the collection. Well, in about 2020, Rosalie was, another person was put in charge of archives, and she was demoted, given 12 hours a week as an archivist. Now, she said to me, really, they needed 2 full-time archivists, and she couldn't possibly have done the job. So this was over the whole of archives, and as the archivist, she was given 12 hours. And so she retired and went down to live in Victoria. I've talked about how Rosalie was treated in volume 6 in the preface. And there'll be different versions of what happened, and you choose who you believe. But because that happened, it put the collection at risk. I didn't feel as comfortable.
Right.
The other person who would have taken over from Rosalie also moved out. So I thought to myself, now what can I do about this? I can ask them for the collection back, but they may not give it to me because I've already sent it to them and they've paid for it, and I don't have the money for it to come back. And if it gets sent overseas, for all I know, it could get lost at sea.
Yeah.
So I decided, well, all my life I've done books for Des, and so I've got the documents. I scanned them. I did it on purpose because I thought something might happen. I thought, well, I can put these in books. So this is how the idea started. And I did 2 volumes, and I thought I was finished. I had 50 boxes of documents, and there's all sorts of documents in here. In the whole series, there's over 500 letters. And some of these letters are, they're just amazing. Now, I'll give you samples as I go along, and I'm sorry it'll be all over.
I just want to now just bring in a couple of quick comments. So just want to make sure. So Cindy Lou has just said, I've on the road to Glacier, the 7 volumes, is Miss Gillian holding up something different that I need to add to the pile. What Gillian held up before were the 3 books that made up the one manuscript that Des presented at Glacier View to say, hey, these are my beliefs. And he wrote it in only about 9 months, and you helped him kind of pull it all together. And it's an incredible read because it actually pinpoints Des's view that the church administration didn't want him, is promulgating the right word, disseminating, sharing. Des, I think, had hoped that the church would be more resilient than it perhaps was, and be willing to kind of hold these different views.
No,
what do you think?
Expected to be fired.
Exactly, and
anyway,
John,
let me go on.
John Kaler. I know. I just want to set the scene. John Kaler just said, "Wow, thank you, Gillian," and here we are, 44 years later. You've put together this incredible series. And what I'd love you to do today is now we'll just dig in, share some of the letters, some of the content, perhaps tell us which volume it's from. And volume 7 is coming out when? Soon? I'm lucky to have a little pre-sale copy. When's it officially coming out for sale?
Well, it's up on Amazon, and look, I have people who are very keen readers, and they've read all these volumes. English teachers, they don't notice that there are many typos, but I have a super typo finder. A lot of it's picky stuff that most people don't pick up. So I put them all up, but they're all proofed and corrected and finished. Volume 7's 2/3 done.
Right.
So I'm not actually, people will go on Amazon and they'll find it and buy it. I've only sold about a dozen of those too anyway, because I haven't pushed it.
When I would love to get you back even when 7 is officially kind of all out there, fully proofed. One last quick thing, and I get asked this a lot. Question from James Z. He said compromise statement, but the consensus statement, the one that's in the 2 parts, is it available in the books anywhere? A lot of people ask for, where is that consensus statement in 2 parts?
Well, it's in the review and the ministry. The ministry is available from Andrew's archives. I can't remember if I put it in the book or not. Now, I've got an index PDF file. If you want to contact me on Messenger, I'm happy to send it to you. Of the 7 volumes. And this gives you the author.
Perfect.
And then the articles in alphabetical order and the letters in date order, going up to the future. Now, it won't be perfect.
And the 10-point statement that was wheeled out in the afternoon, did you have a copy of that original one? Because I know they went on to kind of adjust it and water it down as well.
Nobody was given a copy.
It'd be fantastic to try and get a copy of that one.
It got completely changed.
Yeah, I wonder if Norm Young's got one.
No, nobody's got it.
Right, okay. Okay, over to you. Share away from these volumes. Bring out the gems.
Right, I've got to think where I was. Oh, so why I did the books. So it was because of what happened with Rose Lee, and the collection appeared to be under threat. Now, recently there's been a record article on the wonderful turnaround at archives, and there's different opinions about that. I won't get into it. I've put what happened to Rose Lee and what's happening now as another issue. So I don't want to get involved in that. I've got friends who are involved in it, and I'm not interested in World War III. So that was the reason I did them. I did the first 2 volumes. The first volume was basically what Des and I wrote over 40 odd years, because we both did a lot of work, and it's all in date order. There is some repetition, but I tried to keep out, to make it as least repetitive as I could. Now, in volume 1, there's 2 interviews, one with Trevor Lloyd with Des in the 1990s about Glacier View. Now, when you read these interviews with Des, you get in his head. What was he thinking? So that's like a primary document. Now, Trevor Lloyd did interviews all over the country. He even did one about Glacier View in the 90s. He went around America. He did one with Neil Wilson. They're all in archives. I'm not sure how available they are, but at the moment, but they're there. And then I did an interview because I did a uni paper. I did a master. This is why, I write somewhat as a historian. I've got a graduate diploma in local family and applied history, and then I did a master, and I was about to start first class honours to go on to a PhD, and I met a real CB of a teacher, new to the school, and Des said to me, I've never seen anything like the way he writes to you. Don't do it. So Des was getting sick, and I thought to myself, I don't have time to do this, so I never did it. But anyway, after my 60s, I got interested in history, and I've done research all my life, medical research and other research. So that sort of gives me a reason for doing it. And then I've published so many books, and I've got a pile of them down here that I've redone. Did I show you the Forgotten Day, for instance?
No, only off air.
Yeah. So Des's book on the Sabbath, The Forgotten Day, I've redone that. I've redone a number of them that are out of print, and they're on Amazon.
That's great.
So Jill has been a very busy girl. Anyway, so I did the first two. The second one begins the evidence, and there are a lot of letters in it. And it's not just me, and it's not just Des. There are all sorts of people who've written in these books. And the reason I did, for instance, volume 6 is that John Den sent me an article, which I've got the title somewhere. I'll give it to you later. It was such a good article that I thought, there are another number of things that happened. I had no plans to do volume 6, and a lot of stuff started coming in. Now, what happened at the end of the first two volumes was that somebody at Mark Pierce at the Ellen White estate found a box of Des's documents, big box of documents. And I was asked if I knew what it was. And I said, well, that's come from Milton's biography. That's the documents that Des gave to him and that he found for himself. And I said, I'd like a copy of those to go with all the ones I've got. And I said, if they'll let me come in, I'll come down, bring my scanner, and I'll scan them. Would have taken me weeks. Anyway, somebody did it for me. So every few months I was getting 30 or 40 documents, including letters. So I kept on having material to put in. And so it went volume 3, 4, and 5. And all the time, part of what I was doing was I wanted to show how the brethren treated Des and the concerned brethren. And I wanted to show what Des was like as a character, as a person. So there's a lot of his letters in there, and you find he's writing to people like the Standishes and Raglan Marks and George Knight, and there's a different kettle of fish, but and Des's, and one to Richard Fredericks that is so touching. You see what Des is like as a person, because he's been so defamed and so made so, been treated so nastily that I want people to know what he's like. And then I have put in samples of all the articles that he's written, and they've come from all different sorts. Somebody in America, I get her name mixed up with somebody else, and she has died. But she typed a lot of Des's broadcasts, radio, TV broadcasts. She was a medical transcriptionist. And in all these documents, there's dozens of them. And I pulled some of them out. For instance, in volume 7, I did a section on Des's trips, because Pope John Paul went around the world. I can't remember how many times, but Des did more. And he tells you about some of his trips. I've got about 7 or 8 of them in volume 7. And all the things that happened to him. He nearly got drowned on the Gold Coast. All sorts of accidents. And in there somewhere, Des says, Jill says, you always get lost. You get lost in a bus shelter. I said, how do you ever go across the world and find your way home? But anyway, they're full of human interest.
I like it.
Things. So there's all sorts of documents, and they sort of fit together in sections. So, and by the way, those letters in the volumes 3 to 5 come in the reverse order. So Palmdale, Harry Allen, who's a friend in New York, you know Harry Allen.
Yes, I've interviewed Harry.
Yeah.
You put me onto him. Yeah.
He wrote and he said, why don't you do something on Palmdale? Well, he did it at the right time. And also he said, Len negotiating with the brethren about Des in the early 2000s. Well, Len couldn't remember a lot. She's a busy girl. I could remember more than she did. But I had 3 particular letters. One she wrote to Falkenberg. I think something she wrote to Bill Johnson. Anyway, so I put all this in. I got the original papers of Des on Palmdale, which was 1976. So it's going backwards. Now, historians go forward and they go in date order. And I've tried to do that but it's just the way I got the letters. The person who scanned the letters did it backwards in those volumes. So there's a bit of a reversal there, and I'll get criticised for it, but look, it's the way it happened.
Yeah.
And then I told you, John Den sent me an article when I'd finished. Volume 5 was the end. And
I remember interviewing you and say, "That's it now," and I
Yeah,
said,
well,
"No, I can see more."
3 other things happened in 24 hours.
Wow.
And you know, I watched Ryan Bell yesterday, and I thought, what a great young man, what a talent,
Mm.
and what a sad story of what the brethren did to him.
Yeah,
And
and
I
a
thought,
loss.
I
A
could
loss
never
for the
believe
church.
like him, because I believe in the providence of God, and I've seen it in my life from the beginning. And with these books, it's like,
Yeah.
I was just stuff landed on me. Only while I was writing the books that I had this experience. And I want to give you a sample of that. So is it all right to do that?
Yes, I want samples. That's one of the
Okay.
things I want to happen today.
So
But
one thing that turned up in these, do you want to say something?
I just want to say something, because you and I are similar when we chat. If I don't say it, I'm going to forget. Even though it's probably better to say later, I'll forget. When we've chatted in the past, there's something that comes across sometimes, that you'll get these private letters to you and Des of support and agree with what you're saying and everything, but then you'll note that publicly some of the what they're saying is a bit different to that. So on the one hand, they can be publicly sort of pulling down the Des Ford message, and in private they're like, "Hey, Jill and Des, we support you 100%." Have you, like, that's only me assessing that from, and I might be wrong, but from having interviewed you many times before and researched this
Oh, I
stuff
can
and
give
read your books, has that been a theme that you've noticed happen a lot?
Oh, yes, I can give you one example.
Yeah.
Now, I could say to you that at Glacier View, because I was often standing beside Des in the main hall between meetings, and people would come up. Now, they didn't know me. I was a different generation. Des was 16 years older. So Bill Johnson didn't know me, but I tell you, he didn't like me. And he made a lot of it came from gossip, and was never revealed to me, but I've had to live with the consequences of being basically told that I was a liar. And I wasn't. But anyway, the example I'm thinking of is Hans Larendel came up to Des, and he used to promote Des's books. Des was his hero. He was a teacher at Andrews and a Reformation scholar. And he came up to Des full of enthusiasm, and he said he'd never heard about Antiochus Epiphanes, but he believed it was true. He'd go back and study it. Very positive. Now, I can tell you that. And if you think I'm a liar, like some of the brethren did, well, you're not going to believe me. But there's a couple of letters in these books, and they come out, you know, you have to look them up. Even I don't know what's in the individual book, so I have to look it up too. There's one before Glacier View, a few months before Glacier View, where he writes with his positive support for Des. And then there's one he writes to Arthur Patrick later, and very positive too. And you can see what Hans Larendel really thinks. Now, Hans Larendel, we had a spy network, not that we organized it. But
Don't mention names. I got into trouble for that once before.
Oh, okay.
No, you can mention names that aren't part of your spy network.
I don't remember who they were, but people would contact us and tell us stuff. And so Hans went over to a workers' meeting on the Oregon, on the coast, and he told people Des Ford is 20 years ahead of his time. And then a bit later, he went down to Puerto Rico and he preached at camp. Now, they're very, very conservative. And he said, Des Ford is a dangerous man. Now, we had friends there. They're actually Brinsmeadites, but he was a judge. He became a judge in Washington, D.C. Wonderful people from Puerto Rico. Loved the gospel. They sent us the tapes. He did say it. See, and I could give you other examples.
I know, and that theme that
People
runs
have
through.
got to survive.
Yeah, and that's why I think I haven't been too hard on Bill, in the sense that at the end of the day, he, in my interview, in chatting to Trevor Lloyd in the Spectrum, but it's kind of a bit late now. How did you feel at the time when people seemed to be supporting you, but then you'd hear of that kind of, Des is a dangerous man, their public statements? So not necessarily judging them, like he was under pressure, couldn't lose his job. I'm not even judging those guys that had to kind of, they either remained silent or they played both sides. I've got no doubt that he genuinely supported you guys theologically more than the church. But how did it make you feel? Did you get discouraged?
Actually, most of them, we saw the funny side of it.
Right.
Always had a sense of humour, and actually Des did. Des would laugh so much he'd shake. That's a side, I had somebody say to me once at the fellowship, Des is so serious. What do you say to him? And I said, well, I tell him what the cats are saying to the dogs. And he, it really didn't matter that much.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did notice it. Another one, and this is all political stuff. It's not really what the books are about, but Walter Scragg. Now, Walter Scragg and Des were in an extension school and they came equal top. Walter was very smart. He was an intellectual, very clever man. And when Dallas was on, he came over and he invited us to a meal when we were in Washington, D.C. before Glacier View. And at the time of Dallas, he came over and he invited us to a meal. And he just talked. He told us how liberal he was and how he didn't think much of Ellen White, but he liked a man called, I think it was Derek Dennett. He was a contemporary of Ellen White who did A Life of Christ. So I'm sitting there. I don't know him. Des knows him well, thinks highly of him. And when we left, I said to Des, and he also said, over in Europe, we don't have this problem with the investigative judgment. And when we left, I said to him, because he didn't come out and agree with Des or anything like that, I said, he's going to try and save you. He's trying to get you out of it.
Right.
Now, there was a talk, and this isn't what I intended to talk about at all, but it's just interesting because it's on the subject you're talking about. But on the Friday, it was openly talked about our family going to England to work at the new gallery, a bit like Russell Crans did, and Des to become the evangelist. And it was Duncan Eva talked to Des about it, and Des said to him, look, every time I go to preach at camp or take a meeting, everywhere the churches and all the tents have been littered with George Burnside's, Dr. Ford's dangerous doctrines. And he said, they'll find me wherever I go. And Des was very, very tired because he worked. Nobody worked like Des did. So anyway, I always thought that idea came from Scragg. Could never prove it. But now I've got all these documents. There's an interview of Trevor Lloyd with Jack Castle in the 1990s. And I've put that in, I think it's volume 7, as well as an article that Fred Veltman wrote when he got back to PUC. And look, they're both quite negative about Des. Call him arrogant. And I take a risk by putting them in because this is one of the arguments that the church uses, that Des was arrogant. Well, look, if he was, I never saw it. I never saw it at home.
Not in the
All
slide.
those who loved him.
Yeah.
He just was sure he'd done the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
he had a wonderful confidence about him. And when people use the term arrogant, that's just an attack on that. They're trying to diminish what he says by saying, oh, you're just arrogant, therefore whatever you say has no value. They never counter the claims. They just go, oh, he was arrogant.
So, I sent all the first 5 volumes to Bob Brinsmead. I haven't sent the last 2, but I will. And he read them, and he wanted them. Well, I won't say any more about that. That'll give me some work. But he said they're very honest, and I've given both views, so you'll work out what the church was upset about, and and I tell you where to go, for instance, to get the consensus statement, all that. That's all in the book.
Yeah.
But they're not one-sided, and some of it you read it and you'll think, well, there's several people there who agree Des was arrogant. And look, if you had seen him on the Friday, and I got hold of the notes of the Friday afternoon from Berta Loviak, who was a very good friend, Kendra's dad, and he could give them to me because they were put together by Bob Spangler, and Bob wasn't the president and he died, and therefore Bert could give them to me. I wouldn't have told anybody that, but I've had them for years. I've typed them all out. The amount of work involved in what I've done, transcribing sermons, reformatting text-only files, you know,
It's
most people
amazing.
just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's building on everything I've done.
Yeah.
But
is it just did Trevor
I mean,
Lloyd are Trevor Lloyd's interviews available in one place?
Well, talk to me about that off camera.
Okay.
I'm not trying to cause trouble.
No. Maybe we can chat about that.
I basically wanted some copies of the documents out there, particularly for scholars. They're scholarly, they're for the scholars.
Yeah.
And people like Gilbert Valentine, he's got them all. He's thrilled with them.
Yeah.
Rain de Bruin Samir, I've sent them to him.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got to say,
back you. That was a tangent I took you on there, as usual. Let's get back to reading some things from.
Just hang on a minute.
Oh, the Walter Scragg. We've got to finish that one. Yes.
So, two sources in there name him as the person who came up with the idea of Des going to Newbold, because he was the president of the European division. He tried to save Des, but afterwards,
I was going to say he was trying to save Des, not move him out of the limelight.
I'm giving you an example, like Hans Larendel, that he went back to England, and the editor of the church paper there wrote to us, and he said they had a workers' meeting, and Wally Scragg said, "You may have heard that Des Ford was coming to Europe. I want to tell you unequivocally it was not true," and yet he was the one who came up with the idea.
Wow! Yeah. See.
And I can tell you lots of stuff like that. But what you've got to remember is the scholars really didn't want Des to speak out. Now, Jim Cox wrote a letter to Hamill, and I've got several of those letters written before Glacier View. Jim Cox, who didn't believe in the investigative judgment. I don't even know if he actually believed in God, but I probably shouldn't say that. But he wrote to Hamill and he said, a number of the scholars agree with the problems that Des has portrayed. Now, that's all they needed to do. But they don't agree with his solutions because he came up with this idea of the apotelesmatic principle and the gospel. And a lot of them didn't agree with the gospel.
Yeah.
But, I've said before that Doug Hackelman is writing a 3-volume series on the Cottrell family.
Yeah.
And he sent it to me actually probably 7 or 8 years ago, and he got sidetracked on it. But when you read that history, because it takes in Cottrell's grandfather or great-grandfather, I'm not sure, and his father, and then him, just wonderful family, it becomes clear that the things that Des raised came up all through the history, and people disappeared. Canwright was one.
Yeah. Ballinger.
And I've got to say that one difference between Canwright and Des was Mrs. Canwright didn't write a thing.
Hey, we're going to go back into some gems. I just want to raise this one that Jimmy Z raised, because a lot of people think, why are we still talking about this? And I want to address this, and you can add a comment too if you like. I don't understand all the comments about these continuing controversies that Gillian Ford says are still ongoing. A bit lost about all that. James, they're ongoing because 44 years later, the church doesn't speak openly about it, doesn't address it, doesn't counter the claims. They attack the person. They continue to do that. Anyone that supports anything that's to do with a Des Ford style theology is suppressed, silenced. Pastors cannot get up and speak about the sanctuary if they agree with a Des theology point of view or a different view than the classic traditional viewpoint. They're suppressed, they're silenced. And this kind of conversation will keep on going, and these kind of issues that were never resolved will keep bubbling to the surface until the administration or pastors can feel free enough to speak openly about them. So none of these things have been addressed or put to bed. And so I hope that helps answer your question there a bit, James. But
look, my friend Gail Mason, who's down at Redcliffe Church, and she's a gospel person. That's all she wants to know about. She hasn't read my books. They are now teaching in Sabbath school the Great Controversy theme. And of course, one of the big issues is that they're sending out millions of Great Controversy. Now, this didn't just start. Neil Wilson was doing this.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
They'd have been doing it before he even talked about sending $1 billion out. They'd been giving them away in cities all around America.
Now, in the early chapters of Great Controversy, Ellen White used the reformers in the Adventist Church, particularly Uriah Smith and others, and presented the investigative judgment, which was has caused historically a lot of depression among the saints, because people just couldn't be perfect, and that's what it teaches. Now, so they're just teaching it, and she has been teaching, even though she's a rebel, they have her teaching Sabbath school because she's a very good teacher. She's been a teacher all her life, but she refused to do it on this subject. Paul Johansson, who's a doctor down there, I probably shouldn't mention his name, but he's the son of Jimmy Joe, who, anybody you know what happened with Jimmy Joe and his family.
Yeah.
He stood up. Well, he refused to teach the classes either. So you've got a lot of people, informed lay people and workers, who just don't believe that the investigative judgment.
No.
The church has tried to rewrite it often. They've left the date. They've called it a pre-Advent judgment. But this is what Des went to Glacier View to deal with. And the reason Des did it was because he had so many people contacting him that were going to leave the work. One of them was Vern Heiss's wife, Edna. And she didn't know what would it do to her brothers and what would they think of it. And then she went and heard Des in the 70s preaching the gospel, and absolutely transformed Vern and Edna's life. They became our wonderful friends and psychological supports. So people of that stature, were writing to Des because he dealt with all the heresy and answered all the questions for the division in Australia. And, Connie French wrote to him. She didn't get much satisfaction from Des at the time, but Des took this all to heart. There's another one, a minister who you'd know, who's in Brisbane. I can't think of his name. He wrote to Des while he was a student. So, but the main thing that happened historically was that Bob Brinsmead had gone on to 1844 and wrote 1844 Re-Examined, which he wrote published in July 1978, and Des felt he had to be answered. And that's not the only factor, that's a major factor. But from our viewpoint, there was no politics going on in our house. I mean, there was a lot of laughter about the shenanigans but we were interested in the big ideas. But there was no collusion with Bob Brinsmead, which the church accused us of, particularly me, and it wasn't true.
Yeah.
Um,
And I guess
we said to each other, we put our foot in the stream, this providence, and it took us along.
yes.
So
Yeah.
Des made no decisions to go and, you know, destroy the church, but it seemed the right time. Wayne
Yeah.
Judd said that when Des stood up to do that for him,
Yeah.
he said to him, "It's the time."
It's the time. Yeah.
And of
October
course, he was
27,
right.
1979.
He had a gospel view of Adventism. It wasn't the same as traditional Adventism, but it could have easily replaced it. But of course,
Yes. I
no,
love and
people
I'm
weren't
gonna
willing.
I'm
It
gonna
was a
have
positive thing. He wanted to put
yes.
Christ and the cross and the coming at the center of Adventism,
That's right.
and the church refused it.
Yeah. I want to do an interview with John Rosier, and we've touched on it before. He wrote an article or a paper years ago, what Adventism could have been. And I see that lost opportunity they had by just canning Des and the gospel-centered message. I just want to refer back to James there again, where he was saying, doesn't understand the comments of this continuing, that it's all still ongoing. And I'm not sure why you mean by all that, James. So thank you for saying it. But as recently as last year, the Record put forward the notion in the intro, which I'll play. I'm going to play part of that again soon, where the myth that the majority were against Des at Glacier View, they've kept that myth alive without actually referring to the many facts now that confirm that perhaps the man who maybe started the myth, Bill Johnson, also ended the myth and turned it on its head. They're unwilling to kind of report on that. So, James, these conversations will be ongoing until the church says, yes, the majority were, had come to a consensus with the Des teachings. Have you been following Matthew's Adventist history on Des Ford, Matthew Lucio?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes. Nice job.
Oh, good.
He did kill me off. He got the wrong wife.
Oh, did he? Interesting. Even
it's all right. Maybe it gave me some sober thought.
He made. Hey, we're all
He's
human.
done a nice job because he's not getting into the controversial side of it, and it's mainly biographical, and it's charming.
Does he touch on the consensus statement and the error that was?
Well, he's about to get
not up to that.
I think he's only about halfway through. He's done 3.
No, I highly recommend people go and check out that. Okay, let's get into the 1 hour in. We're going to get into some gems of the volumes. Can you read some stuff for us?
All right. Now, I'm not going to. I might read clips of it, but I want to tell you how the brain worked so that you get in my head. So I'm trying to work out from about 1975 through to 83. That's part of what I'm doing, to see what the leadership did. Now, remember, if you're in big trouble, they don't tell you anything. So you got to work it out.
Yeah.
You don't know what they're doing behind your back.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I've used is Russell Standish's The Gathering Storm, because he tells you their side. For instance, I wrote the soteriological implications.
Right. Yes.
Of Christ. I'm going to go over that because I've talked about it before. But I did it because I was teaching Sabbath school, and Herb Douglas wrote a pamphlet called, and I had to work all this out. When did I actually write it? I wrote it in July 1975. And in it, see, I suddenly heard, after being married to Des and being an Adventist from 1963, suddenly in 1975, I learned about traditional Adventism because I read a book called Perfection, the Impossible Possibility. And Herb Douglas was the editor. He was one of the editors of the review and supported Bob Brinsmead in the old days, was a perfectionist and so on. And, of course, Kenneth Wood and Herb Douglas were very anti-Des. So I'm about to teach this lesson. Des and I did it alternately for the village church at Avondale. the young marrieds. And I'm reading this stuff, and it blew my mind. In fact, I couldn't sleep. It's never happened before for 3 days.
Whoa.
And I thought this was terrible. So I got out the Ellen White index and I went through and found all the stuff about the nature of Christ. Then I went through the Bible. What I did really upset them. And of course, Jill has no clue what's going on. You know, I didn't know. I wouldn't have, if I'd thought this was what the church, everybody had traditionally been taught, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have wanted to hurt their feelings. But anyway, I did this chart on the true and the false gospel. And of course, the false gospel was traditional Adventism. Now, Des loved this. He never explained to me that this was traditional Adventism. Good old Des.
I know.
So he takes it to the Bible department, and I'm trying to do this quick, but you know, anyway, they love it. Heppenstall loved it. John Rosier got it in England because David Curry printed it over there. And it sort of had a life of its own. I sort of carried on cooking and I had no idea what it did. But it was put in the ABC store and got sent to Russell Standish. And so in early 1976, April 1976 was the Palmdale meetings, which had actually been organised beforehand. And he writes about my book. And he says she sounded like Fletcher. Now, of course, Jill didn't know who Fletcher was.
The New Zealand dissident.
He was the dissident, beloved dissident. So
I sometimes wonder.
You could say that.
I sometimes wonder if Des had never met you, if Glacier View would ever have happened.
Well, I have been blamed for it, but look, it was totally. I had no idea, and of course that I never knew what was going around. I remember I was doing a Sabbath school class with about 60 people would attend at Avondale. And I look back and I think, I just knew nothing. How could I do it? But confidently I spoke. And one time, Keith Parmenter was at the back. And I remembered that. And I thought, he was checking up on me. So that would be before 77.
Well, he mentions, he doesn't mention you by name, but he mentions, what is it, infers that your involvement. I can't. You know, when he came back from Glacier View and he had the ministers' meetings and told her to do that, and both of them do a talk. You're implied. Yeah, you're not mentioned by name, but you know it's about you and what you've written.
Yeah, I know, but you know, implied that I lied about the Friday afternoon meeting. Well, funnily enough, a month later, when they actually fired Des, exactly what I said they'd said to us about the conditions is what happened. So I didn't lie.
No.
I just thought it was more final. They said they got out of it technically by saying the Friday afternoon meeting they could not fire Des.
Yeah.
But look, Des said to me before he died, because I brought it up and I said, I thought that's what happened. He did too. Parmenter complains about him as well. We thought it was over. And then, of course, the Review and Herald at the end of the month in August puts a statement, variant views discarded, and says that it happened on the Friday at Glacier View. So Review and Herald agreed with me.
Yeah, interesting.
So anyway, this is before I get into the section to give you a background.
Yes.
So we've got 77 and this sort of stuff. And then Parmenter, the call to go to PUC, there was an exchange between PUC and Avondale. So regularly teachers went over. For instance, Ken and Eleanor Barrett were over there on exchange. So for Des to go was not unusual. And the prime mover on that was apparently, according to John Staples, was Irwin Gain. And then Irwin found out that Des didn't agree with him because he was a very traditional Adventist. And he tried to get it stopped. And he went to all sorts of board meetings to try and get Des stopped from going. But Parmenter wanted Des out of the country. And the statement that he made was, in Australia, Des is a big fish in a little pond. If he goes to America, he'll be a little fish in a big pond, because it didn't work. Des went everywhere, speaking most weekends.
Yeah.
So
Wherever he went, he caused an incredible amount of
so you got to
dialogue.
You can see, oh, they did us in, they deserve. Also see the providence of God working. It was meant to be. We were meant to go. We knew it at Glacier View, and we couldn't understand certain things that happened, but we thought this is providential. It's meant to be. So we never, talking to ourselves, we never felt terrible about it. And nobody was horrible to us and tried to shoot us or
I feel like how do I say this? It's not a criticism, but I feel like you got to enjoy a lifetime of gospel Adventism, where those of us who remained got to experience confusion and conflict between the warring sides.
Well, we got kicked out, and that's part of the story that I tell. And interestingly enough, I'd forgotten a lot of it, and then I find the letters. But anyway, I don't want to get. I could spend a whole lot of time, and it's not all of the book. Working out what they did to Des is part of it, but the best bit of the book is his materials from all sorts of sources. It's like an anthology, and I don't know if you remember those old, I mean, Des used to have these old Sabbath school books that were tall and thick that people used to read on Sunday. All these stories and everything. Well, my books are like that. They're a sampler. They're not all the documents, but there's enough in there to tell the whole story. And what I'm telling you about here, it sounds critical, but it's not the essence of the book, because I don't feel, I sort of think, Len said to me, you know, we're all like silos. We've all got our own beliefs. This is part of the problem. We're not necessarily joined to the big hub. And I don't expect people to think like I do. You know, I've been led a certain way, and we're free. We're free to make our own choices. So, you know, I've had more having to deal with this because it comes up all the time. It's very easy for people to say, well, you should get over it. But it's like somebody comes along and opens the scab and pours salt in.
Oh, yeah.
And
well, the wound has never been dressed, never been healed.
And I do feel things very deeply.
And I also feel that I feel a lot of what you do and definitely some of what I do is when you can see a church that is constantly a conflict, from CBs to Fordites, whatever different variant of that you want to look at, there's a tension within the church that is very, in my whole lifetime I've experienced it, you know, even when I was an Adventist. But when you look at it, you go, hang on a second, there's something like 60, and James from Academy Apologia is watching. He might be able to write in the comments, correct me on this, but there's something like 50% people who come in leave the church. That's a high number. So people like you and I sometimes go, hey, we're kind of seeing some ways that might help to close that door a little bit and stop the mass amount of people pouring out. So instead of them digging their heels in and drilling down against people like you and I speaking up, they should see it as a positive thing. It's an act of service to say, hey, you might want to think about this stuff, or you're going to continue to lose your young people. Something like 40% of Adventist young people leave, maybe higher. You know, that needs to be addressed.
Anyway, I'll forget what I've sort of started you off that there's a brief history, and I do go over this in the books. I sort of go over, I think, volume 5, it might be in an earlier one. I go, and I've got some of it, I've got a lot of it documented. Anyway, very easy to get off on something else.
But we enjoy chatting, so, you know.
We'll be doing it again.
People are getting a bit of a fly on the wall of our conversations.
Anyway, in volume 4, now I was looking at this and I started reading it and I thought, it ends up as a section, and I explained that it's a section, but it's not announced as one. So you'd be reading it and there's 3 letters by Bob Brinsmead. And I take a bit of a risk putting those in because it certainly looks as though he and Des, they're close.
Who's this again?
Bob Brinsmead.
Yes.
So 3 letters come in with date unknown, because what Bob has done is typed them out, but it's got the day and the month, but no year. So they come in, I send them to Milton, because Milton has been hand in hand. Milton doesn't want to deal with this stuff, but he's really happy that I've done it. So it starts off with 3 letters from Bob Brinsmead to Des, and I don't know the date. So I'll just read you what I've got, what I wrote at the end of this section. Now, it starts with these letters, and it wouldn't exist if I hadn't decided to try and date the letters. So this is part of the historian thing, and it often takes a lot of time. Now, in the first letter, written on January the 26th, and it turns out it's 1978, it's got only the day and the month, but Bob mentions 3 things. He notes an editorial, and he gives the title of it from the Review and Herald. He mentions Heppenstall's book on the nature of Christ, and that was probably The Man Who Is God, published 1977. And then an article called The Man Who Is God, also published in the Review. And then he mentions a Bible conference held in Australia. And I thought, boy, I've never heard of that. So I think I've got these things, I can go and try and find them. Now, you go on Adventist Archives, but unless somebody, and probably just about everything I do, there's somebody who's much better at it than I am. But when you go on, you can't really go in and look for particular articles by title. You've got to go in over a period. So we thought, now what have I got? We thought the date was 76 and 77. That's what Milton thought. So I'm going backwards from then, no, forwards from then. So I looked at a lot of things to find exactly what I needed. So I found the 2 articles. I found the name of Heppenstall's book, the likely one that he's referring to. And then I found an article on the Bible conference that was held in Australia. And it was held in December 1978. Now, so I've got that in the book. I've got the articles. I've copied them and put them in the book, and you can read them. And it tells you who was there. Very, very fascinating. To see what happened. So what I already know, I've got this frame, and I know that in 1978, 2 years before Glacier View, Des wrote and told Des that he wouldn't be coming back to at Australia. He'd be staying on at PUC. Now, Parmenter, Duncan Eva, and Eric Magnuson, and I've got a letter from Eric saying Des said he didn't want to go to America unless he was coming back, and they promised him. But Parmenter breaks the promise, and what he did was he came over in October 1978, between the 10th and the 18th, I think, and he meets with the brethren, so he would have talked to them about what he was going to do. And then he talked to Jack Castle, who was there. Then he flies back to Australia, and he says later in the letter that Des was in San Diego at the time, so he couldn't talk to him, but I don't think he intended to. And he addresses a workers' meeting, and he tells them that Des is staying on at PUC. So, of course, we don't know about this. And somebody must have called us. At this point, I don't know who it was. And I don't know where the workers' meeting was. But anyway, so Jill, not being a shy violet, but it's the only time I ever did it, the next day, thinking it's the middle of October, Jill turns up at Jack Castle's office and waits and asks, can she see him? And says, look, we've heard from Australia that we're staying at PUC. Is it true? Because we would have come back in July 1979, and there'd have been no forum and no Glacier View. But a year after we've left Australia in July 1977, Parmenter writes and says, you're not coming back to Australia. Now that's momentous. Well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So it's been told the workers, and they've been told by Parmenter that Jack Castle said they liked having Des there. Could they keep him? So I go to see Jack Castle, and he said, oh, yes, he said, Elder Parmenter asked me to keep Des to quieten things down in Australia. So there's a porky there. So then Parmenter writes a letter, and we get it on November the 2nd. So it's about 2 or 3 weeks after I've been to see Jack Castle. And he writes, it's a 3-page letter. It's in the book. A number of letters from Parmenter are there. And you'll see how he puts down all the rumours connecting Des with Brinsmead. And there's an earlier letter in about June 1978 where he says that somebody from the Brinsmead family has been down. Now, the Parmenters denied that, but it's in Parmenter's letter, which is great.
Oh,
There's a couple of things that Parmenter did that he wrote about, so he can't say he didn't do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we get the letter, and Des is told. Now, Des never got upset, or Des was never jealous. He was never mean. I've never seen him like a lot of other people were. It was just an amazing Christian. But he said to me, what they'll do is they'll put me out in the back of Beyond and they'll fire me. So he knew his career was over. Now, what that did was it prepared him for the following year when the PhD faculty asked Des, would he take the forum? And he said, it'll cause a lot of trouble. He didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And Fred Veltman didn't want him to do it. But in the end, they talked him into it and said, you'll be protected by Spectrum.
By Spectrum.
So that
I did not know this before. I'm learning something new. And that really,
this because I've said it before.
Well, that really, sometimes I need to hear things 6 times before they land, as you know. But what that does is really helps me understand why he needed to draw a line in the sand at the Forum, 79, and at Glacier View, August 80.
See, wherever Des went, there were Brinsmead followers, and they were all in on this 1844 re-examination. Des had to respond to their questions. And then, of course, Wayne and Adrian Zukoski, who both left the church. They were so upset with what happened to Des. Even today, Wayne can hardly talk about it. I was reading something he wrote to me about these books this morning.
Ask him to come on the show.
Hey?
Ask him to come on the show.
Oh, his wife she's had cancer in the jaw.
Right. I just want to quickly bring up something Stephen Beagles has just said. And Stephen's been saying some amazing things about Des. I just want to clarify this for you, Stephen. The bottom line is that church scholars and church administrators were not in full agreement. And that is true. But they were in full agreement that they could live with the consensus of Des's thoughts and theologies, and Des could agree with it too. So we're not saying that they were all agreeing with Des's theology and the manuscript 100% at all. And when Des often used to say the scholars agreed with him, we're talking about that general thrust of agreement that Ellen White's assessment of 1844, etc. They agreed with him that it needed looking at. And thanks for asking that, Stephen.
So anyway, we get the next little piece of the puzzle, and I knew nothing about this. So I've got these 3 letters of Bob Brinsmead, and I'm trying to date them. And I find out that they're written, one was in January 1978. One was, it's possibly 79, that one. One's December 19. I'd say, no, hang on. I've only copied the one letter. So this one, there's a series of letters close together, and I've dated them by what he's referring to, when the issue came out. And I found these documents. So, I would have copied them off and kept them to go with the book. So now I know when the letter from Bob is written. And I think this Bible conference, I've never heard of it because, of course, we were in America. So then I go into the record. You're really going to like this story. I can't wait to tell it to all of you, all of it. And it took me a couple of days to find the article. Australia holds its first ever Bible conference. And what you've got to see is the dating. This is 6 weeks This takes place 6 weeks after Parmenter's been over. He's announced to the division Des is not coming back. And he's written and told Des he's not coming back to Australia. So they have this conference. Now, this is very tiny, the way I've got it. So I can't even read it. But it's got all the big names from America. Now, the idea of this is to...
Where was the conference? Where was it held?
Avondale.
In 78.
December the 16th, 1978. And they called in the whole field. It was a huge thing. They'd never had anything like it. But the thing is, this was the plan. They wanted to take away Des's popularity among the ministry. So they bring over all the scholars. They've got Bill Johnson there.
I've never heard of this.
No, I had neither.
What? Where are the minutes from this meeting? It must have been recorded.
You've got to wait for the rest of the story.
Oh,
because it gets...
Gillian.
Look, it's just wonderful, this story.
Tell me.
So it's volume 4. Just hang on. It'd be easier if I read you who was there. I'm sorry about this.
No, you go for it. Hey, well, we have our short break. We normally an hour in have a break. Let's quickly do that while you gather that together. Don't go away, anyone, because this is new material. I've never heard of this before. This is a landmark conference. We need to find the minutes of recordings, who was there, what's going on, what went down. We'll be back. Let's just have a quick break while you gather your thoughts and find your info, okay? And I'm talking to Gillian Ford, everyone. Loving our
here you are.
And here's the...
I can't move it the wrong way. Okay, that's page 1. And then there's page 2. And it tells you all the people who were there. Where's my... Anyway, when you come back...
We'll come back. 5-minute break. We're going to... What do we call this mystery convention? So I can refer to it.
Australia holds its first ever Bible conference. You can see all the people who were there and all the leaders, people from the field. Of course, we knew nothing about it. But see, this is part of the plan. And I'm interpreting this, but it's part of the plan to demote Des in the mind of Australian ministers.
So Des wasn't invited.
We've got all these wonderful scholars in America. Forget about Des. That's what it's saying.
And Des wasn't invited.
No, we knew nothing about it.
Didn't even know about it.
Oh, look, it gets worse. And it gets...
Can't wait
and
to
in
talk
the
about
end,
more.
Bob Parr wrote a letter about attending the conference, and that's what the corker is. It's an absolute corker.
Can you read the letter for us when we come back?
You haven't read all my book. No,
I haven't.
No, it's got to go in order.
There's the books over there, and you'll read a bit of the Bob Parr when we come to it, though. This mystery convention.
Yes, I'll read his letter because it's the best. But you've got to remember, this came with the letters after the first 2 volumes, and it came in, and then I realized these all belong together.
Interesting.
And see, another thing, we'll be going for a while because
we might have to make we might have to come back tomorrow or Monday, because I'm looking after Ruby today, and I have to head off at 2. Anyway, we'll come back in 5. Right. And we'll make a part 2, because this is the
other look. Before you go, I want you to come back.
I'm coming back. Don't you worry about that. I'm coming back. I just get lots of messages for a break once we're an hour in.
Out of the collection of one of the CBs, somebody sends me 2 type pages. Now, what this turns out to be is the CBs were permitted to meet with these Bible scholars from America. And in it, they record what Dr. Hazel and Dr. Hyde said about Des. And look, it is shocking.
And you're going to read that for us?
Yes, I'm going to read it to you.
We'll be back, and we won't dilly-dally. When we come back, we're going straight into it, and I'll shut up. Okay, see you guys in about 5 or so minutes.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never
And we're back. Second part to our conversation today. Gillian Ford is my special guest. If you look behind me there's 7 volumes and the 3 original manuscripts that we're discussing today, particularly the 7 volumes. And
if you get volume 4 and you look at page 363, you can follow along.
Okay.
And I want to know why you haven't read it before.
Hey, it's like a coffee table book. You just pick up and I just flick and they're all sitting there. Hey, quick, Peter Mashenko's asked me, could you recap again what you were just about to say, Peter, why things had to happen at that time? I'm not necessarily saying that I think they had to happen at that time, but now I have a better understanding of why they happened at the time. Des's hand was kind of being pushed, and instead of going into an endless flow that a lot of the academics and scholars and administrators and pastors did, he felt inclined and inspired providentially to say, this is what I believe, and put it very clearly so that people can then, I love that. I love that about Ted Wilson. He says very clearly what he thinks, and then we can push back or agree or whatever. I don't like the nebulous la la land of Adventism. And so good on Ted Wilson and good on Des Ford for speaking clearly. One other quick question, and Kay Judge and I often disagree on this. She says the issue I see is not so much as an issue of difference in theology, but a lack of ethical leadership by particular people in positions of power. I disagree with that, Kay, and I'm looking forward to having you on the program. I agree, yes, there was massive ethical issues in leadership there, then and now. I agree with you on that. However, I think there's a pretty clear theological difference there as well. And if you read Questions on Doctrine and follow the changes that occurred within Adventism after that, the things that were changed from the traditional view to later on, it's all theology. And Des Ford was offering an assurance of salvation, whereas prior to that, there was a bit of a legalistic leaning. So the theology is, to me, and I might be wrong, and I know that you've pushed back on this, and I'm totally fine with that. It's great. Can't wait to have you on the show. But to me, it's pretty clear there's some big theological stuff going on here, not just, political, ethical things. Anyway, thank you for that comment, Kay. Gillian, just quickly tell us, 1978, there's a mystery conference. You guys weren't invited. I was living here at the time. I didn't know about it, but I was only in year 10. I was probably looking out my window. Year 10 was on the campus at Avondale at that point, where the college is. And I bet if I used my mind, I'd be able to think about seeing them on the campus at the cafeteria. So when did you first hear about this mystery?
When I was doing the book.
You're kidding me.
When I was typing the book.
Your insiders didn't get to you and say, hey, there's a massive conference on. Why aren't you guys there?
No, I'm going to tell you who was there. But remember, I know the background, and I know very well that Parmenter wrote and told Des, and he'd already announced it in Australia, that Des was not coming back. So it's part of, he wants Des out of the country. See, it's a preparation because, well, there's a whole thing that goes, I've done it in the book, going from 1977, 75 through to 1983 of how they dealt with Des. And it's very deliberate. It's very deliberate. It's all planned. The talk about, we tried to keep him in and all this sort of stuff. Not true. Not true. And I've put the papers in, like the transcript of Parmenter after he comes back from, and I've footnoted it. I've done that because a lot of people aren't like me. They don't have a mean mind, but I can tell you what he's really saying behind the scenes. So that's part of what I've done. And, you can disagree with me. And I hope no traditional Adventists read it. I've sent them to certain thought leaders, progressives, and I've put them in Andrew's archives. It's the only Adventist place that I'm putting them. They don't have volume 6 and 7 yet, but I'm waiting for 7 to be finished. But if they want them, they can buy their own set. I'm generous, you know, but not with the enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've sent them to the Library of Congress, 2 copies, the National Library of Australia, the Queensland State Libraries, and I'm going to send them to other outside libraries where Adventist scholars attend, because they're really, you know, I have a lot of women read these. Norma O'Hara, I don't know if you remember her, but she used to be the editor of The Little Friend. But back in the day, she wrote to Des all the time. She's a real gospel person. She's older than me. She must. Anyway, she bought volume 7 and she wrote to me and she said, "My flab is gasted. My flabber is gasted." That's not very humble. All right, I'll tell you some of the people who were there.
I like that. My flabber is gasted.
Yeah. Ron
Kelly
Taylor.
Byrne said, "Oh, hang on, you need to speak into the mic at the same time, otherwise it can't hear you." Kelly Byrne says it sounds like they were putting him up on the gallows.
Fortunately, we can see the funny side of that. Taylor, Parmenter, Duncan Eva was there. He was a vice president, great friend of ours. Gordon Hyde, who's the head of the BRI. Now, he was responsible. He was one of Pearson's hatchet men, and he went down and got rid of the professors at Southern, you know, a year or 2 after Glacier View. And I've got all that in the book too, all about what they did to them. Gordon Hyde was a friend of Des's, very good man, but narrow. And this is, you know, a lot of the problem. Had a degree in communications, not theology. Didn't have a clue. Sorry to be. That's not very kind. But Gordon Hyde, Rao Dedran was there. Alwyn Salem, Norm Young. He never told us. Walter Specht, Siegfried Horn, Dr. Hans Larendel, and then Lance Butler, Lionel Smith, Claude Judd, Wendy Barrett's dad, H.C. Barrett, I think that's him, and Edward Zinke. Now, some of these, assistant to Dr. Hyde, and Gerhard Hasel, and Pastor Jorgensen. And I think Bill Johnson was there. I don't know why I thought he was.
How come Duncan Eva and Hazel didn't let you know?
Well, Hasel was not a friend. He was, as you'll see.
Duncan Eva was.
I don't know. You know, it's possible that I've forgotten, but I don't think so. It was completely new to me. And you've got to see the, you know, I'm talking to you about the provenance of the way stuff came in at the time. And it formed a section. It starts off with Bob's letters. I'm trying to date it. I find out about this conference.
Yeah.
Go into archives. I find the conference and realise the timing. It's 6 weeks after Parmenter's got Des out of Australia. And as I said to you, when that happened, Des basically, his life was over because he just wanted to teach Adventist ministers. And once that was taken away from him, you know, he had nothing to lose. And
to Peter Mashenko's question earlier, that further validates my thoughts that he had nothing to lose. It was now time for him to present his belief claims.
Well, he was still careful, but then when
Yeah.
Wayne Judd and so on came along and asked us, he said, no, it'll only cause trouble. And of course, on the day that we did the forum thing, when he left home, he said, nobody will come out for this. And we got there and it was in the music hall, in the Paulin Hall. And we all had to go up the stairs. And I tell you, that was an amazing sight to see all the people go up to Irwin Hall, where nearly 1,000 people turned up. Somebody flew in from Nebraska. People drove long distances to get there. But Des, he didn't think anybody would turn up. So there you are.
Okay, read to us something.
Okay, so page 363.
Oh, I'm going to get my book. Volume 4.
Yeah. Excuse me while I find my page. Page 363 and 4. And then there's a letter from Pastor Parmenter. Now, the only thing afterwards, on the 28th of December, He said, I should say that we had people will tell you no doubt what happened at our Bible conference. We had a tremendous spirit of unity among the 240 delegates there. Some of the men felt the material presented at the beginning of the conference was a little heavy. But as the conference proceeded, they were much more appreciative of what was presented. Now, there's a couple of letters in between that's part of the chain.
What page is this again?
Well, I'm about to move from it, 367.
Oh,
And now here we've got a letter, Bob Parr to Des, January the 10th, 1979. So this is, just after. And anyway, I won't read the beginning of it. That's on page 369. I would like to stop to chat at greater length. For instance, I'd like to tell you about the Bible conference.
sorry. What page again? I thought
369.
the letter Signs of the Times, letter Bob Parr to Des, January 10, 1979.
It's the second column.
Oh, sorry, that right. I get it. Oh, yes, I go for it.
If I thought that the Bible conference at PUC was gummed up by inconsequentialities, now that was when they went there in 1973. Des and Bob went to a Bible conference. No, they went to Palmdale, but I think they went to another one at an earlier time. If I thought that one was gummed up by inconsequentialities, I can say that I feel, and you won't quote me, I know, but I am now, because Bob wouldn't mind, that this was an exercise in futility. There were no seminar-type discussions. We were allowed to write out questions, put them in, and perhaps, if they were not too prickly, have them answered. We did not get the opportunity to question the answer of the answerer. Ed Zinke, now he's Gerhard Hasel's pet. He mentored him, took the first day's lecture, and that boy is chloroform. He had us all crawling the wall with boredom. What that lad needs is to get out into the field and learn how to communicate with people, because he certainly has no natural talent for it. He droned on and on with his teeth set and his lips hardly moving.
He's such a good writer, isn't he?
Yeah. So you got to remember the whole idea of this is to present the wonderful scholars of America. Look, I'm not very nice reading this out because there's lots of stuff that's very positive and gospel centered.
You're not lambasting them, are you, Gillian?
Only the fact that some sound was coming out convinced me that he was still alive. I sat with Vern High through the conference, and the whole thing got too much for Vern and me. They were so much sitting around doing nothing that we took leave of absence one day, unofficial, I assure you, and went out and hit the small ball with Arch Heffron. So they went and played golf. Naughty boys. That was our only salvation, but there were other brighter moments. Georgie, for instance, gave a very good lecture, arguably the best lecture of the conference, on the spirit of prophecy and its relationship to the Bible. Of course, he was on difficult ground here, but he did well. But at the end of it, he tottered off the rostrum and collapsed into a dead faint and was unceremoniously carried out.
Wow.
Then he was whisked away in an ambulance, and that was the last we saw of Georgie. Actually, the boys panicked a bit, for he had merely fainted. It was not a heart attack. But they cancelled his second lecture and moved everyone up, and this enabled us to get away a little earlier on the last day. Anyway, he says a little bit about that. But the Americans didn't treat Georgie very well.
No.
Next column. Unfortunately, I've been asked by Duncan Eva to write up the Bible conference for the review. I did not want to be asked because I told Lance Butler, who was his brother-in-law, that if they asked me, I would tell the truth and they wouldn't like it. However, having had Duncan Eva's royal command, I suppose I have to put my tongue in my cheek and write about the unnumbered blessings that showered upon us as we listened to Ed Zinke, Alwyn Salem, and others bore us to sobs. Alwyn Salem comes very close to Ed Zinke when it comes to sheer boredom. He spoke for half an hour and 3/4 on the role of the Holy Spirit in interpreting the scriptures, and I do not exaggerate when I tell you that it was not until the last 20 minutes that he began to get onto his topic. I couldn't believe that a man could waffle so long and say so little. I don't know whether I should have read that. But anyway, There was applause at the end quite often when the lecturer had done his bit, and they applauded Alwyn, but I didn't. I may be something of a hypocrite, but not sufficiently big enough a hypocrite to applaud a man who's bored me to sleep. It was, anyway, we'll get that. So that's his commentary on the Bible conference.
He does say Alwyn is a nice bloke.
And now, what I did when I read that, I thought there's something missing here. And so the night before last, Jill went in and moved everything up and put in the extra page, which should have gone in there. And then the next morning, having put it up on Amazon, it won't make much difference to people who buy it because the pages are roughly the same. And I changed the table of contents. But you can do that with Amazon when you publish books. If you find you've got the mistake, you can go in and republish it. Anyway, just hold on a minute while I find volume 5.
I better go and get it too.
Right. Just hang on a minute. I've got different piles of stuff depending on what I would need. And I've got a type.
So volume 5?
Yeah. Now this is the page that I put in, but it's also in volume 5. And even though there's a few things, not many, that are repeated, it's because they fit in the series. So I've got an introduction up here, but a paper came from somebody's collection, the CB, and it had 2 pages of typed stuff, and it was clearly probably Llewellyn Jones, because it was his collection, listening to Gerhard Hazel and Gordon Hyde speak about Des. And I want to read this to you because now I believe what happened was that Parmenter.
What page is it?
I don't know. Just hang on a minute. Llewellyn Jones. Sorry about this, folks.
They can skip the 10-second button later. As I'm flicking through, there's some really, I want to keep stopping and reading stuff. Prophet or plagiarist?
83 in that book. So
83 in volume 5.
Now, I can't absolutely prove that this was at the same meeting. I don't know whether it says in volume 5 that it gives a date on it. But I found the original document. I've got that, and I typed it out, which I've done with many things.
So what number? 83?
I think that's what it was.
I just got sidetracked with the cartoon, some cartoons here.
Oh, yeah.
Well.
I just put some of those on Facebook. So this is in a meeting where Hazel and Hyde are commenting about Des to the CBs. Now, I think that what happened was that at this scholarly meeting that Parmenter permitted the CBs to question the scholars who came over from America because the likelihood of Hyde and Hazel being together. So this fits in with this section. And this is what they say. Dr. Hazel expressed concern at the position taken by DF, Desmond Ford, in regard to the inspiration of the scriptures. He could see grave dangers in the claim that the Bible is only right when dealing with salvation. For instance, if Bible history is not correct, what about Genesis 1 and 2? Creation could therefore be questioned. Dr. Hazel spoke of the danger of Ford's claim that prophecy had repeated fulfillments. For instance, Ford claimed that Daniel 8:14 did not have a complete fulfillment in 1844, but would have more complete fulfillment in the last chapter of Daniel. Ford argues that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled Daniel 8 because he fulfilled the majority of the prophecy's specifications. It's not exactly what Des said, but anyway. Dr. Hazel replied that there are 15 specifications. Antiochus fulfilled 14, but not the 15th. Then he was out. All specifications must be met, or Antiochus must be rejected. Ford argued that no commentator on Hebrews 8 and 9 could see a two-apartment sanctuary in heaven. Dr. Hazel replied that one does not prove they are correct. We are not dependent on commentators for God's faith for today. 2, Dr. Hazel said he knew of 2 modern commentators who could see the two-apartment sanctuary in heaven. One of these commentators has written in French, while the other has written in German, probably Hazel himself. 3, if a shadow shows 2 legs to a human body, it means that the body has 2 legs. Thus, when the shadow sanctuary on earth shows 2 apartments, it is because the reality sanctuary in heaven has 2. Ford claimed that the Old Testament did not deal with the second advent of Christ, but only with the first. Dr. Hazel stated he did not know what will become of Ford. He said that Dr. Larendel spent quite a deal of time trying to straighten out Ford.
Interesting.
No, Ford is not a thinker. This was apparent to Dr. Hazel. As he said, Ford gradually retreats when pressed in discussion. He stated that Ford just rattles off cliches. Dr. Hazel has just been placed in charge of the Old Testament section at Andrews University. This was the position held by Dr. Horn, who is about to retire. So we'd probably be able to date that to find out when Horn retired. It might have been, it might have been later. But anyway, Pastor Hyde stated he had grave doubts regarding Ford. Ford is just a string of cliches. Wonder who he got that from. He referred to the recent split that took place in the Lutheran Church, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then he said at the end, the liberals are so nice, easygoing and broad-minded. But I mean, it's...
Let's see, again, they're attacking Ford, not what his claims are. They make their statement of what they believe. They mock him, but they never refute his claims with any kind of counter.
They don't even state his claims properly.
They don't state his claims properly, and then they don't even clarify their claims. They just say this is the truth.
I mean,
it's ridiculous.
I mean, Des and Hamill said this, that, you know, Des made Antiochus Epiphanes in Daniel 8:14, but that's not true. He saw him as a prototype, you know, with a repeating fulfillment. And that at the end of time, it was to have a much bigger interpretation. There's never ever said Antiochus was it. But, you know, this is how the rumors start. Anyway, that's the section. And you see there's different documents and how they come together. And you see the picture. Here they are. They put on this wonderful Bible conference, which must have cost a lot of money.
I know.
To sort of take Des out of the affections. This is my interpretation, I've got to admit. But the timing of it. But it's an absolute, you know, Bob Parr goes and plays golf.
Yeah. I'd love if
some Adventists would find Bob's comments, you know, they'd say, oh, that's not very Christian, but, you know.
The funny thing is Bob was like that in public too, so it's not like he's really revealing anything behind the scenes. Like he talked like that to people and about events in public.
Yeah.
From the pulpit almost, he would make those kind of jokes.
And another, I don't know whether you want me to talk about another segment. I haven't sort of, I'd have to do it from memory, but what happened between 1980 and 1983, where in 1982, I've got whole segments on this. And this is very interesting because what I've tried to do is piece it together with the documents that I've got or I've come across.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, nobody tells you what happened. You don't know what happened behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So another thing, after Glacier View itself, when Des lost his ordination and lost his job, and one of the things that's, I think it's in volume 7, I'm just thinking of stuff as I go. There is a letter from, no, I won't remember his name. He's dead now, but he was in a teacher, and he was an administrator in Queensland. And Arthur Patrick, in 2005, when he was getting ready to do a presentation on the 25th anniversary of Glacier View, for which he got a lot of flack, he sent it to this man. Now, this man writes a response, and inadvertently, it turns out he was in the meeting where Des was fired on September, I think it was 1980, at the division. Now, Des wasn't present. That wasn't legal.
No, that's right.
But he gives you an inside view into what happened in that meeting. For instance, the division brought in another committee, and they also brought in lay people who were against Des. Now, whether they actually counted their votes, but it was stacked.
Mm.
And the same was true in the Prexad meeting. There were 3 Prexad meetings, which, you know, all this becomes clear in the book because I document it all. And I've got GC notes and stuff from everywhere. I've got the documents from the letters from the brethren and their articles in Ministry and Review and GC archives, you know, notes of what went on. So it's piecing it together. This is what you do with history. You use the documents. It's interesting to have oral history. I've got oral history in there too. People have told me some amazing things right at the end of doing the books. Anyway, this other episode is about what happened in 1982 to 83 when they come in for the second time to discipline Des. Now, it's never presented like that. And the starting point, what I think has happened, and I was working in Sacramento, so I left home at 4. I had a long day. And I was also doing hormone counseling back then. So a lot of things, you know, they went in and out of my head. I'm sort of know what's going on, but not altogether there. So, all right, 1982. The first thing I know that happens is and I've mentioned this before, I get a call from Eleanor Barrett. And Vern Parmenter has been over, very friendly with the Barretts, and he's told them that his father has gone to Spring Council, I think it was, or no, Fall Council.
His father, Keith.
And that he's asking GC to take away Des's ordination. So he was still an ordained Adventist minister and would say this when he was preaching. And they wanted to stop him being able to say that. So they wanted to take away his ordination, call him apostate. Now, that was a flag to me because the word apostate means you've left Christ. In Adventism, they've got a meaning where it's the same as a dissident, but it's said to make you feel bad, I think.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing? There were 3 things. Take away our membership.
Yeah.
So Eleanor tells me that this is happening. So I call a friend, I won't name him, sensitive, to ask if the division was as true. And yes, it was. I called back. Now, we weren't in the business in those days. You didn't phone Australia at the drop of a hat.
No.
I was accused of calling Australia from Glacier View, but I never called Australia.
No. There was no Zoom back then.
We didn't do that. Anyway, so that's the first thing I remember, and I remember it very strongly. So the next thing, a day or 2 later, we get a call from Duncan Eva, who was the vice president, a very good friend, and he wanted to get Des back in because he was a gospel man. And I used to call him Uncle Dunk. So he calls up and he says that Neil Wilson has asked him to intercede, and Neil Wilson wants to see if they can bring Des back in. And he's presented it to all the world presidents, and they've said, oh, you can't do that. And he said, yes, we must do it. So this is the front story, and Bill Johnson uses this, how Neil Wilson tried to plead with Des. He tried to plead with Des. But now I'm going to tell you the backstory, which I didn't know. So in early 1982, and this becomes clear because Calvin Edwards was at GNU then, and they contacted, the Australasian division must have contacted Des, and he said that he wouldn't meet with the brethren without the other GNU men. Now, Smuts was there, and Calvin was there, possibly Noel Mason. I can't, there was a bit of a changeover. Anyway, so Des says he won't go unless they revise the issues. And Neil Wilson agrees to do that. Reluctantly, he lets the GNU men go in. So the division asks GNU if they will not hold any meetings in 1983 in Australia because, Smuts had been over. They were very popular and they wanted to stop it. That's the whole essence of this. So, what do you think? So this is the first memory for me and what I remembered for years. I don't remember anything happening before this. And then I found a folder that Calvin had given me before he left, and it was in the documents, where the church and GNU had agreed to share documents. So in the book I have scanned these, and you can follow them page by page, what they did and when. Now it turns out that Parment had gone to Spring Council, that would be early 1982, met with the brethren to get this going. And then they had a meeting at GC in July. And it turns out, Calvin says I was there, and Duncan Eva said I was there. I was there. I've got no memory of it. Says who was in the meeting? Jill's got no memory. So don't know what was going on there. Hormonal blip. So it was an ongoing thing, and you can follow it through with their notes.
And then you found the notes to collaborate.
So
corroborate,
in one of the volumes, I'm not sure which one it is, I've got those documents. You see, part of the process is for you to read the documents and make your own mind up. Don't take my word for it, because I don't know the whole story, but this is what I've got. So we ended up having 3 meetings. So I think the meetings were that Duncan Eva came over. He stayed in our home. We went over to Calvin Edwards. I fell asleep on the couch. I don't remember anything. And then the next meeting was that Des and I, because Neil Wilson did everything very nicely, and Calvin Edwards flew to Washington, D.C. and met in Neil Wilson's office. And Neil Wilson, I've said this before, he had a golden coloured carpet, the colour of sunshine, and I've sat on it. So he was there with a couple of others, and I've got it written down. I can't remember now who they were. And my memory of that was how rude he was to Calvin. This is the General Conference president and not acting like a Christian. So anyway, we had that meeting. Then we had a meeting in San Francisco in January 1983. And I was there. They never mentioned me, but I was there with Des, 3 of the GNU men, and I think it was Calvin, Noel was there, Smuts was there, and I think Brad McIntyre. I think there were 4 of them. And then it was a serious meeting. Spangler was there, Bill Johnson, Dick Glacier, who was the head of the BRI, Duncan Eva, another man from Brazil who was a vice president, I'll think of his name in a bit, Gerhard Hazel, who presented a paper, and Niels Erik Andreasen. So it's a serious thing. And it was after a short time, they said they weren't going to discuss the issues. Now, Neil Wilson has said they would. They didn't do it. So the meetings broke down. And they basically said Des had become even more out on a shelf than before. But that was, they would have called Neil Wilson. He would have been a very happy man because it had gone exactly as he wanted. Now, one of the things was, and I was there for this, they discussed taking away the ordination. Des said, well, you can't do that because it's the Holy Spirit that ordains people. And they agreed, people that we were talking to. And he said, you can't call us, what's the word? Apostates. because he said the better word would be dissident, and they agreed. But of course, when it all goes back to General Conference, they change everything. So they got called apostate and so on. I'm not even sure if they published that. They were pretty careful not to say Des was apostate because a lot of people would have objected to that.
Yeah, I thought that had come out in writing, but I must have heard that wrong.
So then there are the letters in this section from Parmenter, the secretary, can't think of his name, and then Neil Wilson telling us, that what's been decided. So we're out. Now, Jack Castle in his interview, that comes up later, that's in volume 7. He said after that, Neil Wilson kept calling PUC to try and get our memberships taken away. So we stayed at PUC as members until we came back to Australia. But Neil Wilson would call every new minister that came in. See, this is not new in my book. I've talked about this before, but some people wouldn't have heard it. And talked to every new minister. Lou Vanden was one. Maury Vanden had been there before. Lou Vanden came in. And they came to visit us, to talk to us. Ray Mitchell, who was an Australian, came. Roger Bothwell, and there possibly was another. So every so often over those 20 years, they would come and say, do you want to stay members? And we'd say yes. And they said, well, you can. And Neil Wilson actually said to Roger Bothwell said that Neil Wilson said to him, if I wake up one morning and I find out that the deed is done, I'll be a very happy man. So we came back from America and Des was going to do some work for the Baptists. And so we handed in our membership. I actually wrote to PUC in 1983 after they called Des apostate, handed in my membership. And Fred Veltman, who was an elder, called me and he said, Jill, please don't do it because we want to defend your membership. And they did. So that whole piece I've put together in a historical way. And you can see together. So when Bill Johnson tells you how Neil Wilson, tried to get Des back in, Bill was conned. And in that interview of Trevor Lloyd with Bill Johnson, sometime before he died, maybe a year before he died, which is
Spectrum one.
Was in Spectrum.
Yeah.
That's very important to compare with your interview.
That's right.
Because he comes out and he admits he knew about the 10-point document all along. And he also says that he told Wilson where he stood, which was essentially where Des stood. And Wilson said, what are you going to do about it? And Bill Johnson says, I'm willing to lay it aside.
And that's in volume 7. You've included the interview, the Spectrum one, or is it 6?
Might be 5. Just hang on a minute.
That'd be a good one.
A whole lot of stuff by Bill John. I basically put in, there were 3 articles over the years as editor where Bill Johnson wrote about Des, and then his memorial, which was not kind. It was not kind to me. It was published about 2 days after Des died. And he suggests that I was the one who pulled Des out of, based on nothing.
No, just rumours. And
Des was, was
bearing false witness, Gillian. They were bearing false witness. Hey, we're going to have to wrap up. I need to walk out the door and pick up Ruby.
Well, I need to tell you. Just tell me.
Tell us the Spectrum one, because I think that's important for people because I want to encourage people to go to Amazon right now, buy these books. Cindy Lou said earlier, is there a revamping of volume 7? No, Cindy, what Gillian was meaning is there's little tiny things.
I mean, you could wait for a month and buy it, but it's not going to be essentially any different.
It's not much different. The facts aren't different, just some more grammatical.
Okay, this is volume 5.
Oh, it is volume 5. Good. So what?
833. That's where I've got most of the stuff about Bill.
So volume 5, 800. No, what page number?
I think it's 133. I've put it down there.
133.
But the things I've told you are more about the politics, and that's only one part of the book. One of the things is to try and make the gospel clear, and I've come back and back and back about that.
So it's page 133, volume 5. Now, I would love to get you back in 2 weeks. let's get some more letters ready to go. We'll start without me getting sidetracked, and we'll go straight into you reading some letters and stuff. I think that'd be great to get you back and do that, because I do want to ask you some things. When I talk about, and just be pondering this, when I talk about this, that it is a theological difference, it's not just political. The political side of it is what we've been talking about today, and that's hugely important. Like, it's 7 volumes worth of importance. But I also just want to touch on this notion of the, in my mind, and I know a lot of people disagree with this, and I'm okay learning about it, but it seems to me there is a GNU Adventist, Good News Unlimited style Adventist, Gospel Adventist, and then there's an Adventist that's more traditional Adventist. And either way you look at it, they've got a different theology. Now, there's subgroups, there's all different, versions of each group. I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody, but I want to talk about what is this Des Ford gospel that gave a lot of people a sense of assurance, and a lot of people were drawn to it as in a way that they weren't drawn. So some people are drawn to the Des Ford theology. Some people are drawn to the Doug Batchelor, Ted Wilson theology. I want to talk about in a couple of weeks what is the difference between the two, because I think there is a theological difference that defines.
Oh, there's definitely. There's no doubt that what Des was teaching was not normative Adventism.
Exactly. Great. Well, let's come back and do that.
Which is why we understood where they were coming from. And Des said to them, look, you can't turn the ship around in the middle of the ocean. He let them down kindly. He said, I understand why you've got to do what you've got to do.
Yeah. So I've been talking to Gillian Ford today, had a fantastic conversation with all our little sidetracks. It doesn't matter. That's a conversation, and that's what we just had. Go and get her series. They're all available now on Amazon, and any future versions are going to be just slightly grammatically corrected. She's just finished Restoration. She's got the Daniel book.
It's volume 1. There's volume 2 to come.
Oh, to come, Deliverance, which is the lion on the cover, or the black Daniel. That's right, the Black Daniel book.
And a lamb on that one.
Lamb on that one. I like that.
And they came today just so I could show you.
Perfect timing. So, Gillian, I'm going to end with the 1984 statement that no one, the majority were opposed to. They didn't see any light into what Des was saying. And then in the 2020 interview I did with Bill, him saying, no, the majority did see light in what he was saying, and they did come to a consensus. I'm going to play that because I spent 4 hours on it last night, and a lot of people would have missed it at the beginning. We're getting some nice comments. There's Angela's, but thank you, Gillian, with beautiful love hearts. And we've got Random T Chance. Excellent conversation. Thank you both. And good work, Peter, and thanks to Jill. So, yeah, it's been great talking to Gillian today. I'm going to go out with this clip that I put together last night. Not the long intro, just from the 2 back-to-back snippets with some words I've put in. So you need to watch closely and read because it goes pretty fast. And when I played it earlier, the volume was almost off. So thank you, Gillian. And everyone, go and get these books. They are amazing. David Schramm has written, which book would be good for someone who is current SDA but is questioning? There's a good one for you, Gillian.
I don't know.
And I think...
you can read these. You can start at the front and go to the back. You can start at the last one and go backwards. And you can just buy one.
And what was there's a good one that I just looked at the other day. Jesus. What's the one called? I think it's just called Jesus or something. It's a real gospel. It's like I said to you once. What's
Jesus Only?
Jesus Only. Go and look for that one, Dave. Start with that, and then buy all 7 volumes. Buy the 3 manuscripts, and and you can go for it.
It's like Bill Cork. I said to him yesterday, "What am I going to say to them, Bill?" And he said, "Tell them to buy all the books."
To buy all the books.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, Bill Cork. I would love to interview him one day.
You've got to interview Bill. It's very interesting.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Gillian. I've got to run. I'm going to put this up here. I always have trouble with the technology, but I think I can work it out. Thanks everyone too for your support. Got my QR codes up in the top corner here. It really helps. Let me just remove that so it's not on the video. I've got that there. So yeah, this is just something I spent a few hours on last night. I don't know if it makes much sense, but it just gives a little insight into Glacier View and a myth that the majority were against, perhaps even started. I don't want to make any judgments, but definitely something that Bill Johnson pushed at the start in the early days, and then he corrected that as he was older, and I think that's quite courageous. So thank you to Bill for that. Right, where am I? What am I doing? Here we go. See you, Gillian.
Bye.
Oh, hang on. I'll just go back. And, oh dear, I've made a few things wrong.
We can disagree with Ellen White, and that is of no consequence.
That's what we're hearing.
See you, Gillian.
Well, that's what I'm hearing.
It happens in practice in certain parts of the world.
But that's the one illustration we were bringing up. It seems in practice that that's the only thing that we can see against a guy like Des Ford, Walter Ray.
Desmond Ford's teachings were tested against the scripture. And the Glacier View group testing them against the scriptures did not see light in his view. It is out of that context, not against Ellen White.
Hazel, Guy, and Johnson. And we followed the same format, except this time we had, statements that came from the breakout groups. And we tried to put them together and weld them together. And we developed what we called a consensus statement. That came, Glacier View, the conference itself, was scheduled to end at noon on the Friday. Okay. Friday morning, the consensus statement that we developed was brought to the floor. It was read, it was discussed, and it was voted. If not unanimously, very close. And very interestingly, Desmond Ford said, I can agree with everything in this statement.
Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me